Listen, I know the world is scary right now. Corruption, war, inflation, demographics, degeneracy, disease, unrest, hatred, and despair. We didn't come here to tell you how it is, but that it's going to get way better.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I need. Everything I wanted, just wait and see.
Better by
It's a
Bitcoin.
good.
Hey. Well, we are streaming from a new platform today, so hopefully it doesn't suck. Cheers. Episode 27, Better by Bitcoin podcast. We have myself, JD, Bondor, and Zach on the pod today, and we are going to talk about, are you a slave? Defeating the surveillance state. We're kind of curious about some of the stuff going on with the LA riots and with just kind of the random videos we've been seeing on X and everywhere in the world. On Elon's thing where it's like the drones are beating the humans. And so I think kind of the question to start with is, does this ever get better? Bondor.
I mean, there's no privacy, period. And that's just what it is. Maybe we'll get some privacy in the future if Bitcoin wins, but there's just no privacy. Does it get better? Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully. But probably not for us.
That's a shining light and a glimmer of darkness. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
What about you, Zach?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Can't predict the future. Like,
This is one of those days. Maybe we should have just not done this.
I mean, will things get better? Yes. When? I don't know. They certainly have to get worse before they can get better. We certainly agree that Bitcoin is the antidote to a lot of the poison being injected into society. You know, it's like, think about nature, think about camouflage, you know what I mean? Let's talk about privacy. Like, it's always a cat and mouse game. It's always predator versus prey. Humans have this ideological concept where we want everything to be perfect and we want it to be a utopia based on our value system, whether you're a communist or a libertarian or whatever. But it never plays out that way. And it's never fully that way one way or the other. So I feel like, honestly, it's probably the same game that was being played before. It's just being played with new tools. Now we're in the information age, and we have to move this battlefield to the realm of information for the most part. You know, it's not like, you know, like peak World War II, like World War II, post World War II. Those were highly centralized times in human history where the government had a lot more control than we imagined they did. There were only 3 news networks. They controlled the propaganda. They controlled the media to a much larger extent than I think exists today. It just seemed more calm because they controlled it better. Yep. You know, so I don't know, like, I actually feel like we're reverting back to the mean of just like general chaos that humanity experiences. I think that nukes have actually drawn conflict out, and you know, the overall numbers of deaths and the intensity of it and the speed is less, but you know, we're not in all-out combat, but instead we're in Afghanistan for 20 or 25 years, you know? So it's like it's attrition right now is what it feels like. It feels like we're in total attrition on all sides. Nukes play a big hand in that. Bitcoin is going to continue to decentralize power and authority, and that's going to be a painful process. You know, the people who have the power now are not going to want to let that go, and they're going to want to do all of the crazy shit that we're seeing them do right now to try to hold on to it, to try to make people afraid. to cause problems and then offer up solutions. So it's gonna be a bumpy ride. Um, in throughout all of human history, people fought and died for freedom and autonomy and sovereignty. Um, you know, as Jason Lowery points out, like the physical domain is where these disputes have always been settled when it came down to it. Um, we have this new thing called Bitcoin where maybe we could resolve some of those disputes digitally instead of physically. Um, so I don't know. I think this is actually more like par for the human experience. Um, I think that we all look at the past as this ultra peaceful, ultra wonderful place where nothing bad happened and everything is totally fucked now. But I don't think history supports that thesis. So I don't know, man. Welcome to humanity.
Do you guys think Bitcoin makes the surveillance state better or worse? Because I feel like we're probably all in agreement that the surveillance state is not going away, and it's only going to get more advanced as we continue to be more connected and have more drones and have more ways for them to listen to you. Cough, cough, whatever you have in your pocket or whatever device you're listening to this thing on is listening to you. But do you think...
Yeah, shout out to our FBI guy, local FBI man.
Yeah, or girl. We're not sexist here.
We don't discriminate. Yeah.
We don't discriminate. So if our local FBI guy or girl, and also, by the way, you guys, if you're the FBI guy, should not commingle with the NSA individual who's also listening, because cross pollination of that information is actually probably illegal in some jurisdictions that are not the United States, because it's probably legal here. So where we're going with this is, what do you guys think though? Does the pseudonymous nature of Bitcoin make the surveillance state stronger, or does it actually make it possible for privacy to return?
I mean, it's an interesting question because it's pseudonymous. If you can tie one address to somebody, then you can see all of their transactions that went through that address. Now, one example, like, okay, how could it get better? One example that comes to mind would be like the traffic light thing, like, or the automatic. Oh, you ran a traffic light, so we had a little robot that took your license plate photo, and then we'll just send you the ticket, right? No problem. This is going to be swimming. Like, we're going to make so much money off of this bad boy, and lo and behold, it takes a photo. And there's a famous case of this. It takes a photo with a guy driving, because you have to get it was your car and you were driving, right? Therefore, you get the ticket. Here's the evidence. But it was the guy driving, and then there was somebody in the passenger seat that wasn't his wife. And so that turned out to be evidence that he was cheating on his wife for some other case or something. And I'm totally butchering this story, but you kind of get the idea where this is going. He basically sues the city, wins the lawsuit, and they completely either have to dismantle or essentially destroy or not use or can no longer use the automated traffic stops. Now, that was the case for a little bit. I don't know if that's the case still. And this is something that happened in LA, as I understand it. But it's interesting because it's this new technology that they say, oh, great, look, we can push on this, but then there's consequences for pushing on that they may not realize, that are more expensive. You can imagine a guy suing the city, and that could be a $100 million lawsuit, crazy amounts of money depending on his circumstances and the amount of money that was in play in his marriage, etc. So you think about that, well, what if the state, because the state is going to be on a Bitcoin standard. This is just going to happen because Bitcoin's the best money, it's going to win. Okay, when the state's on a Bitcoin standard, and they can just surveil everybody, because they'll have everyone's we know that you got Bitcoin to this address and we know that's you. Well, everybody else will be able to look at the state and be able to say, yeah, and we know where we're paying our taxes. We know the address we paid the taxes to, and we can follow that address through all the stuff. So it becomes very important for the state to all of a sudden obfuscate, just for the sake of national security, and how do they fund the military, and how do they do all this stuff that the state knows it's going to have to do. But if it's on a Bitcoin standard, there's some real problems with that. So there's going to be a lot of pressure, political pressure and otherwise, to obfuscate Bitcoin transactions. Now, I don't know how that all plays out. This is very speculative, but it's something that's like interesting because there's always knock-on effects, and a lot of times those knock-on effects push in ways that we don't necessarily expect. So that's interesting to me in terms of what could happen for privacy, for like good things that could happen for privacy going forward. And maybe that's like, maybe the state's just like, yeah, cool. We're going to do this huge campaign. Everybody's going to get cryptographic or confidential transactions on Bitcoin, CT, right? There you go. Now you get a lot of the whole, like everything kind of changes in that regard. Who knows if that happens, but it's interesting to me.
It's interesting, actually, that perspective of, it's going to be rules for thee and not for me type situation where the state's going to be like, no. You don't get to know what our address is. Oh, but you get to know our address? Oh, yeah. Yep. Yes, we got to track your taxes. And it's going to be one of those interesting, like, cat and mouse games where that is kind of decided and figured out. I really do appreciate the Snow Crash perspective on this, where there are a bunch of different states, and if you've never read the book, we talked about it on a much earlier pod, but the TLDR is, it's a future state. It was written in 1999, and it's like this future state version, or like the early 2000s of kind of the world takes place in Los Angeles, but the U.S. has collapsed. And then there's like General Mao's Hong Kong, or General Chao's Hong Kong, and there's like all these like little different, like they call them burbclaves, but like each one is a specific country, and you can have passports to these different countries, and then it's like you get safe transport in and out of that country if you have that passport type thing. And so it's going to be a similar situation where I think the government that is requiring you to pay taxes is actually going to also be required to like put up or shut up. And so we actually get to this point where people are like, hey, you need to pay me taxes. And it's like, well, what am I getting for that? It's like, I'm not going to pay you taxes if you're not giving me something. So I also think the other side of that will be
ensuring my privacy and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting because it's like the government obviously is going to want to have their addresses, hidden, which is Sailor's whole point, right? Like Mahlers and those guys are kind of coming out, Metaplanet, GameStop, this is our address. And then Sailor's like, that's really stupid. And so it's like, those are two sides of the same debate. It's like one guy's like, this is a terrible idea. One guy's like, this is what you need to do. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how that continues to advance and go through and move through. StreamYard, or rather Riverside, which is what I'm doing here. No offense, Riverside, but you're kind of terrible. It didn't take my episode name. It says, welcome to our live stream. And it has the Riverside logo in the top left-hand corner and says live, which is also terrible. So thank you, Riverside, for being terrible and confirming for us that we need to use StreamYard when it is not broken. So StreamYard, if you are listening to this,
both terrible.
They're both terrible. They both have some terribleness to them. But
welcome to the internet.
We know I have a backup that works, but it is just as terrible, but differently terrible than our traditional streaming platform. And also, X, you're terrible because you won't let me change the name of the live show mid-show. So, welcome to our live show will be the name of the show until I get to change that. So, anyways,
one thing in terms of surveillance, I mean, that's like Bitcoin related surveillance. But there's also just the general surveillance of like one nation under CCTV kind of like surveillance. And
speaking of the United Kingdom,
yeah, like that already exists. Like even in America, I don't know if you guys know about Gorgon Stare. Have you heard of Gorgon Stare?
Mm-mm. Yeah.
Zach.
Yeah. I think I just was reading about this the other day.
Did you just become Mr. T for 2 seconds? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Gorgon.
It's a Gorgon.
So
right?
Gorgon. I mean, I don't know if I'm even pronouncing it right, but Gorgon Stare is like it's a 3D, or maybe it's not 3D, but it's a
5D,
real time.
7D.
Yeah,
Quantum.
14D.
4D chess.
It's real time tracking and video that you can like fast forward and go backward in time on of massive like citywide things, and then it'll have an AI overlay, so it can be like, oh yeah, where did this car start Where did it go? How long did it take to get there? Like, oh, okay, rewind on that. And that's basic. We should just basically assume, like, this is Gorgon Stair is one of the systems, one of many systems that exists as an attachment to like drones. During the LA riots, somebody figured out, oh yeah, there's a drone that's mapping the whole riots as they unfold, which is to say everybody who was at the riot, like your entire position, everything you did during the riot was recorded, probably in 3D fidelity, where they can see, oh yeah, you reached in your pocket, you pulled out your cell phone, you checked your tweets, you put it back, you reached down, you picked up a rock, you threw the rock, right? Like, it just tracks all that stuff. And then it's like, oh yeah, and then you like walked over here, then you like went over here and your car was parked 6 blocks away, and so then you walked to that and you got in your car and you drove home where you live in whatever, Inglewood or whatever it is, right? So all of that is just, it's already done. And that's just one of the systems. We already know there's another system that was built by Lockheed Martin that's deep space satellites orbiting Earth that are literally just scanning everything that happens on Earth all the time for Lockheed Martin, for the Air Force or the Navy, whoever needs it, right? So like we already know like all this stuff is out there. So there is no privacy. The only way that you're going to get privacy is if you figure out the systems, and there's cool stuff and cool devices like this that can somehow block these privacy surveilling systems. It's like Zach said, cat and mouse. One of the systems that I think is cool, and I don't know if it'll block the high-end government surveillance, but it can certainly block CCTV stuff, which is, it's like sunglasses that shine ultraviolet light that you can't read on your own eyes, but it like will like destroy, but not destroy, but like very much blind CCTV for your face. Like you won't be able to track your face. There's another video I saw recently, which I thought was hilarious, but I think it's a new Jaguar or one of the new cars that's coming out, high-end car, uses LiDAR for its tracking system. As in, like, we're going to track the cars around us so that we can do auto driving and all the full service driving, etc. And the video was a guy recording this car on his cell phone, like just looking at the front of the car on his cell phone, and you could see the LiDAR dots burning the retina of his cell phone camera. Just literally destroyed his camera on his phone because he was shining it at the car. So it's like, well, that's interesting, right? Like, at some point, you'll be able to fight back on this stuff.
Yeah.
BRB, you're going to try to fix my camera.
Hey, it's contagious.
Right.
My camera.
Now it's mine.
I know. That's hilarious. It's so funny. The interesting thing about the surveillance state, like fighting back thing, is the clandestine solutions are also interesting. I watched a video a couple weeks ago of this one like part of China where these people are literally just wearing the like pantyhose over their face to just like block out. It's like, oh, like you just see these people driving, like, oh, everybody here's like, is everybody here just like a criminal? It's like, no, they just don't want their face tracked. So they literally just like wear the pantyhose over their face, and then it's like they have the pantyhose with like Joe Biden or Trump or whoever's face on the front of it. And it's like, this is kind of funny.
Yep.
But that's going to be kind of the solve you need to have. It's like if you want to have like true privacy, like GG in the Bitcoin space, he just wears a giant green suit. Green's probably not, like, full disclosure, if you want to be anonymous, a giant green suit is probably not the way to go. Do like a black, maybe like a camo or like an off-white, like a cream. Don't go green. Like, people are going to be like, oh, there's a dude over there. But like that level of like coverage of your face is probably.
I'm not sure that's a dude.
but to be fair, like that's it. Like if you want to legit be anonymous, and if you want to legit be, a true cypherpunk of some way, shape, or form, you're gonna actually have to do stuff in the meat space, to do that. And so it's gonna be interesting as number go up and as the stuff continues to change and grow and morph. How the world adapts to privacy in a surveillance state world is going to be really interesting. Like, I think the other thing that's still not talked about enough, and we talked about this on an earlier podcast also, though, is the actual like hardware backdoors that are in all of our devices that we don't even know about. There are just things that you legitimately have to trust. And it's like, oh, I'm trusting my camera. I'm trusting my computer. I'm trusting this microphone. Like, I'm trusting all these things. The most common case for people or rather the most, like, known instance of a hardware backdoor that people are just like, what the hell's going on, is actually DJI with their drones, which is why, like, 3 or 4 years ago, there's a big hubbub about municipalities in the United States using DJI technology or DJI drones for their surveillance within the country, because DJI drones have a backdoor that is confirmed that people were basically doing like, hey, I'm gonna do like a test to see what radio signals are coming out of the thing, and so it's like my remote is transferring from my remote to my phone and from my phone to my drone. But then what's this fourth video stream that's going to frickin' nowhere that nobody knows about? And that was one of the issues that was coming up, was like DJI was legit mapping the entire world by just taking a feed of every single DJI drone
for the
ever.
purposes of the CCP.
Yep. And so you're going to have to shake hands with the surveillance state in some way, shape, or form. Like, it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The question just comes on whose terms is it on? Is it on yours, or is it on, the terms of whoever's making the devices that you're using? And there's going to be a time where the most valuable person in your family is going to be your kids. And the reason for that isn't because they're your kids. It's because they're digital natives, and they will think differently about the technology that you're interacting with. You will also be important in their lives because you will have a different perspective for them. But for you, it will be very important for you and them to actually have open dialogues about this kind of stuff, because you're just going to get a perspective from them that you've never had, and they're going to get one from you that they, aren't naturally inclined to think about.
Twitter wrecked. Oh, Twitter's back up. One thing that's interesting, I think, and this changes on a probably monthly basis, but I think there's still the ability to be fully anonymous online. And I mean that in the sense that Satoshi was fully anonymous. Nobody has actually pinpointed who Satoshi was with definitive evidence. I mean, Zach, you have a theory about it, and people have a lot of theories about it, but
Elon.
there's no real
Wrong.
It's Bondor.
There's no real like a hardcore case for it. It's definitely not me. And I find that interesting. Like, JD, you said like, oh yeah, well, you can't run this, like, you can't trust the software you're running, etc. There's actually systems now where it's like, no, you can actually like go through and like, hey, if I hash this set of software, it should have this hash. Cool, it does. That means I can trust that. And if I, and I can use this, and you can actually like, I forget what the name of the project is. It's out there, but it basically starts with these really easy to verify primitives that are not even hashes, but it's like, yeah, this is the software you're running. You have to read 100 lines and confirm that these are the 100 lines. And from those 100 lines, you can start to build higher systems and higher things that are like, yeah, we can deterministically prove that I'm owning the software, that it's in accordance with what I believe it should be running. Like, I mean, when you run an Apple computer, it's constantly talking to Apple and just sending all of your information to Apple, like, all the time. Unbelievable amounts of information. And you just have to like go along with it, versus these other systems and privacy software that you can use that are like, okay, cool. And now from those primitives, you can start to build higher primitives. Like, now I can connect to the internet via Tor and no one can get my IP address. Well, now you can start to get an email address. When you get an email address, then you can start to get access to accounts and all sorts of other stuff that no one can actually even tie to anyone's like physical presence anywhere. And if you go through these, it's extremely painful and hard to go through some of these processes. I've tried some of these things before. I recommend trying it just so you can see. But man, it's so painful. And you need to have, so it's painful, but it exists and it's possible. I think where I'm going with all this is that for all of these stuff, for all these things, there's trade-offs. And the trade-offs are always going to be, you have to make the trade-offs in accordance with your risk model. Put together your threat. Like, hey, do I need to protect myself from nation states? Because of what I'm saying is going to be very painful for a nation state to hear, right? Am I a whistleblower? Well, then you probably have to go through those steps and go through the process of putting together an anonymous online account, which is going to be very painful for you, but it's going to be less painful than spending your life in prison. So you're going to have to make those kind of trade-offs. And same thing with your kids, same thing with your family, same thing with your, hey, I just want to torrent like illegal movies, right? Well, you're going to have to make choices about how to do that because they're still probably suing people for downloading content illegally. So it just goes on.
Do you guys I'm actually curious about this because it's like, you constantly hear about the like EMP gun or just like guns in general. Shotgun is probably the most effective if you're trying to go after a drone for obvious reasons. But I am kind of curious y'all's take on the Second Amendment in the United States because, looking at our demos of like who actually watches the show, we do actually have, a pretty decent sized viewing audience that's not in the United States. How would you guys, break down two things? The relationship with the Second Amendment with the current state of the surveillance state in the United States, like how important is it or not important is it? And secondly, how do you think the last bastion of the Second Amendment, like the United States, is going to impact other people as it gets worse? Because I do think the surveillance state is going to get worse. And I actually do think the cause or the call for guns is actually going to be higher in a Bitcoin world for a lot of different reasons. Because I just think it's going to be one of those things where, more people in a lot more places are going to want guns, and they're probably not going to want them. I mean, it's probably just be like sport or hunting. Like cities, probably not so much. But I don't know. I'm just curious. Like, relationship with the Second Amendment during your surveillance state. Has yours changed? Do you have one? And then, do you think more people around the world are going to actually start like really vying for that right, especially with drones and stuff like that?
I think that sovereignties will bifurcate on a Bitcoin standard, and for the record, I don't think we're going to see this in our lifetime, in any like massively meaningful way. 20 years really isn't that long, especially as you get older. Like they just go so fast. Now, obviously, a lot can happen in that time frame, but what I'm trying to say is that, hypothetically speaking, let's say the U.S. totally just fails. The Second Amendment is not respected. Just authoritarian regime. The commies take all the guns, as commies usually do. You'll start to see the idea.
It's for your protection.
Exactly. If you want to be safer, guys, make sure you can't defend yourself. It's definitely safer. But you can't kill the idea of America. Like that cat's out of the bag. And so it'll just manifest itself somewhere else. And that would likely be on a Bitcoin standard. And so you'll have, new America form somewhere, wherever, Latin America, whatever. On whatever continent, you'll have a bunch of freedom-minded people who are obviously down to defend themselves, are going to create their own state that'll probably be on a Bitcoin standard, that'll be armed to the fucking teeth, and will be like America 2.0. Like just like hypothetically speaking, if America falls, with respect to the Second Amendment, I used to be a lot more naive in my thought that, everybody in the world wanted sovereignty and everybody in the world wanted freedom. But the fucking reality is they don't. There's a handful of people around the world who truly want to be responsible for their decisions, and there are a lot of people who don't. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the Second Amendment is like, can the culture who's adopting it handle it? Because it comes down to culture. And no, like not every culture can handle it. Like they just can't, you know? They're not born with the idea of sovereignty and a disdain for the government. They want to be taken care of. They're basically, you know, children in adult bodies, and they want some authority figure to be taking care of them. So no, I don't. I think that there's a lot of people who prefer to live under an authoritarian regime. You know, we assume that everybody values the things that we value as Americans, but those are generally speaking pretty unique characteristics. You know, in other words, with great power comes great responsibility, and there's not a lot of people who really want to take responsibility for their behavior, which is what being pro Second Amendment really is. It's saying I'm willing to have this great power, but I'm willing to take great responsibility in order to maintain that and utilize it. So, do I see the rest of the world just, you know, waking up and being like, hell yeah, freedom? Based off of what I've seen over the last 4 years, like, no, I fucking do not. And the people who don't want it will be totally captured by it. And maybe it'll take them 50 years or 100 years or 200 years to be like, wow, authoritarianism is terrible. We'll have our own little mini revolution. But the thing that's special about the United States and about American culture is that, and the thing that we can't assume, you know, you were talking earlier about kids, JD, like we have to, you cannot assume that the kids aren't going to be brainwashed like they're being by an authoritarian state that wants them to feel safer under their care, which is ultimately abusive and manipulative. So it's our responsibility to instill these principles and these ethics and these morals into our children. We have to do that. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that, you know, with respect to drones, there's always a countermeasure. There's a countermeasure to everything. Countermeasures will be developed. There's no question that drones are insane. They completely change the dynamic of the battlefield. I think only on par with nukes. Like there's if you guys have seen Jason Lowry's little chart, it's like blunt force objects all the way to nukes. And then there's one branch off of that, which is drones, in terms of where the end of the line is of kinetic, you know, combat.
Yeah, because after nukes, there's nothing beyond mutually assured destruction, right? Like, okay, cool, everyone's dead.
End of the
but
line.
with drones, it's a tactical, completely surgical kind of warfare.
Yeah, I think everything that you were just saying, Zach, I think the thing that's been hitting me the most, because I had a 16-hour drive this week, and so I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about this topic of story. And it's like, I think the most expensive real estate in the world is right here, and everybody forgets that. It's like you could go buy Madison Square Garden.
JD just pointed to his head, by the way.
I did. I pointed to my head. By the way, my head is the most expensive.
He's not talking about Los Angeles.
It's the most expensive. Your head is definitely less expensive than mine. But no, the space between your ears, is the most expensive real estate in the world. And that is why there is such a battle for your attention. Period.
That's cool.
If you can be convinced something is true, it is true. If you're convinced that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, he did. If you're convinced he didn't, he didn't. If you're convinced that you're a piece of crap, you are. If you're convinced that you are a champion, you are. Like, you know, Henry Ford was right when he said, if you think you can, you're right. If you think you can't, you're right. Because the studies they've done over and over and over again about things like the, you know, superpower of moms, right? And so what I mean by this is there's a study they did where it's like if a woman hears a crying baby, she can have super human strength. It's like that. There's all these stories where, this car flips over and then they hear a crying baby, and the mom kind of runs in and like lifts up the car with this superhuman strength and like gets her baby out, kind of thing. The reason that is so important to understand is because everything is physics, everything is momentum, and everything is story. The interesting thing about the Bible is the Bible and just kind of like creation is a story. That's how we talk about it. It's like the creation story. It's the story of humanity. It's the story of time, right? Like time is not just talked about as this abstract. It's talked about as this evolutionarily developing thing. It has a beginning, it has a middle where we're at now in this like existing state, and it will probably have an end, right? But that is all a direct byproduct of momentum. And so if your real estate between your ears can be co-opted by someone, anyone, because of the stories you tell yourself, then we're going to be in a really bad way. Like you were saying, Zach, it's like culture is the stories the collective tells themselves. It's the reason the people in Japan walk up the same side of the stairs and only walk down the other side of the stairs. So you see these great images of people in the subway like funneling up the stairs on one side, and then people are able to really easily make their way down because nobody's going down. Like the story of that culture is respect. One of the issues I would say with the United States is we've been constantly lied to by our electorate that assimilation is not required. That is a lie and a misnomer. Because at the end of the day, I think the pride people get one thing right, and what they get right is like, you are right, you should celebrate your differences. But what they get wrong is all differences are important. So if you're white, that's important. If you're black, that's important. If you're brown, that's important. For a lot of different reasons. Because at the end of the day, like one, black people interact differently with vaccines. That's kind of important. Same with, brown people, whether you be Latin, whether you be Indian, whether you be Asian, like whatever it is. The removal of these differences is the big problem. And so circling back to what we were talking about, the surveillance state's entire goal is to keep you on your toes. And so it's very important that you fill this real estate with positive, empowering, and focused stories that remind you of all the things that you want to be reminded of. You need to be sovereign. Okay, that's a thing. And if you don't want to be sovereign, by the way, then you're going to just be, what Zach was saying, is you're just going to be a lemming. And that's fine. A lot of people can be lemmings in life. That is what it is. But I think, if you are just watching something like this and it's just a good thing for you to consume and you're having a good time, we're very glad you're here. But do know that anything and everything that happens to you in your life is your fault. To a degree. Like, if you walk out and a bus hits you, okay, but why were you there? Right. So, like, there's a lot of different pieces to that, but, yeah.
In terms of, how does Bitcoin make this better and the stories we tell ourselves, I think there's a really interesting, call it a synergy or like this beautiful relationship between the First and Second Amendment, which is like the First Amendment is protected, the memes go on, First Amendment is protected by the Second Amendment. Because if the First Amendment fails, well then we're going to need the guns. Okay, that's interesting. But now there's this other part of it where the First Amendment has now given us Bitcoin. You cannot have a Bitcoin without a First Amendment because software is speech. And if you don't have a First Amendment, then you're not going to have software. You're certainly not going to have robust software. You're not going to have highly developed software that doesn't have backdoors because it's just, software is not speech at that point. Software is a product that we can regulate. But if software is speech, well, then you can have cool stuff like encryption and cryptographic signing keys that nobody can F with and the whole thing. And ultimately, you'll get something like Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin, to JD, to your point, has these really fantastic qualities, which are you can custody your own keys. You can just hold on to your keys and then you become responsible. If something happens to them, well, you're SOL. Sorry. And that's your reality all of a sudden. Well, but then that is now I custody my own keys. All of a sudden, Second Amendment becomes very important again for a different reason. Because now I'm custodying my own personal wealth and value. Okay, well then owning guns is all of a sudden very important. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Now, what does that do in terms of stories? Like, if you can custody your own keys and you're in a country that doesn't have a Second Amendment, well, all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure, a lot of political pressure to have a Second Amendment, to make that more possible, gun ownership more possible, self-defense more possible, right? There's also, even if you don't have a First Amendment, well, just because one other country, the U.S., has the First Amendment, we can be relatively certain that Bitcoin development will continue, that Bitcoin nodes will not be able to fully shut down, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, anybody who's in a world where they don't have First Amendment right, they're still going to, they still have to use words, right? Like, okay, so if you have to use words, well, then you can store Bitcoin because Bitcoin is just words. And then you get into okay, well then Bitcoin's literally infiltrating their culture and pushing on these stories that they tell themselves, we don't have free speech because it's not useful or whatever the story is. But then Bitcoin basically just says, well, that's false. It's totally useful in so many ways for all these incredible reasons. And then that pushes on that. And then it's pushes towards the second. And it turns into this virtuous cycle of increased freedom, increased responsibility, increased freedom, increased responsibility. And I don't know, man, it just seems super interesting, fascinating, bullish for me. I'm like, great. This is a cycle that you can imagine it ultimately pushing on surveillance state, where it's no, even the state itself was just, no, wait a second. We want to shut down the surveillance on particular types of transactions and people and places because, well, heck, we're the state. We can't be caught with that. And that turns into other things as well.
Yeah.
Counterpoint.
Zach.
I mean, I don't disagree. I as you're talking, I'm thinking about, there's that quote that human beings overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And we're all generally pretty egocentric. We think of things in terms of at least our own lifespan. It's everything's going to change in our life. And I'm kind of thinking what if we just zoom out on that quote? I've said this before, but I try to think in terms of generations, right? Because one generation, it takes let's say 15 years to brainwash them and indoctrinate them into whatever culture, and then you're kind of roughly set in stone.
Unless they spend the next 15 years unindoctrinating themselves.
Rare, very rare.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Bitcoin does some of that, but yeah.
But those were people who were inclined to figure
rare,
it out
yeah.
anyway, right? This is why so many people don't care, right? You can literally say, here is freedom in code, and they're like, did you catch the game last night? They literally don't care.
Bro.
But I'm hopeful over the long run. I think that's possible, but I really think, as you're saying this, I think it takes a lot longer than we'd like it to. I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah.
I'm saying it's just generations away, because that brainwashing has to effectively go through, 3-4 generations. The elders have to agree with it, believe it. The 70, 80-year-olds have to believe it, and the newborns have to be taught it. And we're the first generation really here to take this thing on. And so it's the people all over the world who've adopted this are the people who are Americans in spirit and in heart and in ideology, like ethically Americans, ideologically Americans, not, geographically. So America as an idea, it like it infests. The virus spreads to the people who would be Americans either way. People who are willing to take responsibility, people who believe in sovereignty, people who don't believe in being taken care of by the state. And so like that's the tip of the spear, right? And so how long does it take for the tip of the spear to bleed out to whatever the next percentage of the population is? I don't know. And maybe what I'm not accounting for in this is like, if you see crazy hyperinflation, maybe that's the catalyst. Like Saylor says, that's the war that gets people willing to change their habits and behaviors. But we've seen hyperinflation happening within the last 10 or 15 years. Bitcoin's been around. We've seen it in multiple countries. And we haven't really seen massive Bitcoin adoption in these countries that I'm aware of. So it's interesting. I don't know.
Oh yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. And I think that the real corollary is just looking at fiat and how it came about, how it changed the culture, and how it did that over generations. Like the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, right? And you look at all the generations, it's basically just been a slow roll downhill since 1913. Like there's been big steps along the way, like Bretton Woods, U.S. becoming the International Monetary Standard. Okay, that's a big, like that's a cliff right there. And then 1971, with going off the gold standard, that's another cliff right there. And you can see like we've been tumbling down this hill for a long time. So as we're working our way back up the hill, the bottom of the hill was the invention of Bitcoin, because that's at that point, anybody who sees all the problems of the last 100 years can now exit, and they can just, I'm done with that. Cool. There's a solution. Bam. We don't need to participate anymore. Awesome. Exit. Now, as all of the wealth and everything else flows to them, it's going to be exactly like you said. It's going to be, they only have influence over their extremely small group of people or their family, right? Like, oh yeah, we're a Bitcoin-based family, and that's what we believe is true. And so as they live their lives out in their communities, they'll gain just that little bit more agency because they're on a Bitcoin standard versus everyone else on the fiat standard, or putting all their wealth in real estate or whatever it is. And then over the course of generations, that's what compounds. And so whatever that's going to be, 5 generations down the line, we're back to what we were in 1913 in terms of culture and economics and world trade and all the big picture things, music and art and everything else. We're back to like a level of sophistication that we haven't really even seen since 1913. And then from there, we'll go forward. And that touches surveillance state as well. Like, people, of course, they'll care more about privacy if you don't need a credit score to get loans or whatever else. Well, if you need a credit score, well, everyone's got to know all your transaction history and the rest of it. And it's just like, well, wait a second, what are we doing? So yeah, absolutely correct, I think.
Yeah, I think circling back to the surveillance state point, one of the things I was thinking before, and I think you touched on it, Bondor, is like the surveillance is only relevant if somebody has physical leverage over you. Okay, surveil me. But if you can't stop me from behaving in a particular way, I don't give a fuck. Honestly. So
Interesting.
If the states, if the sovereigns lose that leverage over however long, 100 years, 200 years, 50 years, then it's sort of irrelevant, And obviously Bitcoin gives us the freedom to transact, which is the reason we all value it above anything else, is they don't have the leverage anymore if a group of people wants to break off and do whatever they want. So cool, surveil me, but I'm only afraid of the surveillance insofar as the state I'm in has total control over my physical behavior. And I think that that will erode significantly over time. Certainly not tomorrow, but as new states pop up and evolve and form, and maybe this happens in the United States, maybe you see a bifurcation, states' rights become a huge issue again, and certain states will be made up of a particular group of people who are not going to exercise, physical threat over their constituents, because their constituents are all Bitcoiners and they're paying tax in Bitcoin, and they've kind of reorganized what the social agreement is, the social contract. So, it's like the surveillance in the digital age is information, right? We've got two realms. We kind of touched on this earlier. There's the information realm, there's the physical realm. Bitcoin fuses these two things together. That's what's novel about it. Digital surveillance is inherently informational. It's digital. So, but I think that I don't care unless they also control the physical realm, and they can control my ability to move around and eat. If they can starve me out or throw me in prison, then them controlling the informational realm is also really valuable. You gotta manage both realms, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. They're both important.
This is actually how I think it gets better, and I know we're a little past transitioning into that, but I actually think that's how the reason the world gets better in a surveillance state is because of Bitcoin, and it's because of the requirement of sovereignty for the sovereign. There's going to be a massive additional requirement for sovereign individuals to be able to remain sovereign, a massive requirement for a drone state to be overcome. There's going to be kind of like we have cell phone jammers, and you have all these different areas where you can, block Wi-Fi or block any type of emitters of rays or waves or whatever. There's going to be an entire cottage industry that already exists that we just don't know about. But it's all about, three things. It's like the meat space clandestine solutions, the super high-tech solutions that are like weapon-oriented, and then the, digital solutions that are just completely software based. There's going to be hardware, software, and then like meat based stuff. But that entire industry is actually only going to continue to advance and develop and move and get shaped as the surveillance state continues to evolve, because people are going to want to remain anonymous, and they're going to want to remain unseen, and going to want to keep themselves and their families protected. And so that will be there, and it only takes one person to need that. It only takes one person to require some type of mini gun that shoots baby drones to kill big drones, and then that thing will be developed. Or it only takes one person to, need a solution that you can put a phone on a table or put a piece of hardware on a table, and it can find any, mechanical or electrical hardware backdoors in that thing and tell you want to use it or don't use it, right? Like these sci-fi things that we've heard about forever are only one crazy person away from existing, and that's pretty exciting. Like, I think we're actually, on the precipice of a lot of really cool technological advancements, and for me, that's exciting, terrifying, but pretty exciting.
Yeah. I just think that, there's never going to be 100%. There's always going to be, cloaked, camouflaged, clandestine individual sovereigns in an attempt to fool you, confuse you, take advantage of you. That's not going away. The way that they do it will evolve and change. How people defend against it will evolve and change. But, the crucial thing about Bitcoin is that Yeah, well, let's say this, right? Like, so the surveillance state, like I said before, is totally, it's basically digital. They're vacuuming up all of this information, all of this digital information. But the real control that they have in the digital world is over the ledger. The real control that they have is they say, hey, you're kicked off of the monetary network. You can no longer spend. If everybody is speaking that language and they say, bam, you can no longer speak that language, you're forced from being able to participate, in the physical realm by paying for things, voting with your energy. But Bitcoin completely fucking changes that, and they no longer have the ability to enforce an economic choice that I'm making, which means that they have to put themselves at risk and enter meat space militarily or physically in order to stop me from doing something. They can't just press a button and turn off my ability to participate in the network anymore. So in some sense, it's kind of ironic, right? Bitcoin actually forces things back into the physical realm a little bit, which evens the playing field quite a bit. The state for the last 30, 40, 50 years has had total control over the ledger and total control over the network, which gave them outsized leverage and how we behaved, and they didn't have to do anything physical at all. They didn't have to go to our door. They didn't have to get a bunch of people to arrest us or whatever. But Bitcoin totally changes.
I mean, look at the nature of inflation itself. It's like inflation is literally theft from a distance. Like you can steal somebody's money from across the world. Like just whoop, yeah, we're just gonna take that. It's crazy.
Yep. Totally.
And Zach, I think that's the really incredible point, and I'm gonna try and butcher it here for you. It doesn't matter if they can't do anything about it. Like your credit score only matters if you're gonna need your credit score. Like that, it doesn't matter if you don't need it, right? Well, why do you need a credit score? Well, if you want to get a mortgage, like if you want to get a car, like, well, yeah, but if you have like Bitcoin, with the products that are coming out today, there's just Bitcoin backed loans and everything else. And all of them are like, yeah, we pride ourselves on, you don't need a credit check at all in any way. Well, wait a second. That's different, right? The whole surveillance state, the apparatus, like doesn't matter anymore because it can't affect your behavior. Okay. So then why invest all the money in putting together this crazy surveillance state thing? Because it has no effect on reality, right? There's gotta, like, I'd have to do more research on this, but there's gotta be like an interesting historic corollary. Hey, we used to do this, but we don't anymore because there's no there's just this weird thing that we don't do anymore because we realized it wasn't actually paying for itself, essentially. Like, we don't need these processes anymore. I think that's a fascinating point. I got to think about it more for sure. It's a fascinating point because it has the power and the potential of completely obsoleting a surveillance state. Not today, not next generation, 100 years from now, perhaps, but it has the power of it. It has the economic incentive says, boop, we don't need that anymore. Yeah. You could surveil the blockchain all you want, but it doesn't matter because no one cares. Nobody even looks at it. Like, because it's not useful for anybody to look at it because at the end of the day, they can't stop you from making the transaction.
Yep.
Now, maybe they enter the meat space like you're saying, and they go through this wild process of, yeah, well, now we have an AI drone that just follows everybody around and blows up and like blows their head off when they make a drug purchase or something, right? Like, but who wants to live in that world? That's insane. So I don't know. It seems pretty bullish to me.
Any last thoughts on we're coming up on the hour. Thank you for the comment about our title, Martin. Point taken. Probably still going to keep it in there because we're mildly regarded. But at the end of the day, you're probably not wrong. I think for me, kind of like a last thought on this is, really trying to go into the like generationalness of everything. Like I'm really trying to get a good understanding of what our generation, 80s, 90s kids, millennials as we are called, have in kind of like giving something to the world. Like, I'm very curious what generation Satoshi is from. You know, is Satoshi a boomer, is Satoshi Gen X, Satoshi a millennial, he, she, they, them, whoever. But I do think that's interesting because I think generational curses or generational struggles and trauma are real. You know, COVID is going to be a thing that, you know, our kids in the generation below us really struggle with because there's just so many kids that had so many developmental issues because they never saw anybody talk and saw no smiles and no anything for 18 months. And there's still that. I still see people walking around. Literally was at freaking Costco getting gas and saw somebody walking around with a mask and gloves on outside in 90-degree heat. And I'm like, apparently
Smart.
COVID affected your brain. It didn't just affect your physicality, it affected your brain.
No. It revealed their brain.
This is true. This is also true. But I think that's going to be the biggest thing is, you know, what so the question here is in regards to the surveillance state. I think what our generation is going to bequeath to the next generation in a positive sense is a latchkey kid mentality in a good way. I think the latchkey kid mentality of come home when the street lights turn on is actually probably one of the most powerful things we can pass on to our kids because our kids are sucked into little blue lights all the time. And it's hard because we are sucked into those little blue lights too. I am sucked in way more than I need to be. And so I think if we can continue to find ways to get people outside while, you know, the sun is out and get people off these little blue screens and continue to remind people that meat space is important. Like, meat space is important, I think, is the note. Our generation is the last generation to remind people before it's lost forever that meat space is important.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's the sovereign individual point or the fourth turning point about where millennials are at? You know, basically we're that Gen 1 that has to essentially fight the revolution, destroy the old thing and rebuild the new thing. That's essentially what our generation's here for. Revolutionaries to some extent, and it feels like that's certainly what's happening. And I think maybe to your point, JD, expanding on that a little bit, is it's like within the new world that has to be built, the useful seeds from the old world need to be replanted. The things that are eternal and should continue to live on and previous generate and into the next generations. You know, not everything needs to be destroyed. Obviously, certain things need to be carried forward that are useful and important and end up being the enduring, timeless aspects of, you know, being a human being. So yeah, I think you're right on that. I think that makes a lot of sense. We have to rebuild the thing, but we have a responsibility to inject the important, useful things from generations past.
Any last thoughts, Bondor?
No, I think that's all on point. The idea that millennials, here we are in a fully internet-based call. I've you know, the Gen Z is fully aware of how AI breaks everything online. The next generation is just going to be like completely uninterested in AI, but millennials will have all the power. Or completely uninterested in anything online because of AI, because they can't. There'd be no way to distinguish between reality and AI, and so one of the great ways to distinguish is just to not open your computer, not look at your phone. And millennials have that experience already, deep in our childhood somewhere. What becomes important is just meeting people in meet space, having eye-to-eye contact, having handshakes with people, giving people real hugs, you know, that kind of stuff. It's not the world that was created by the internet is a wildly incomprehensible world in relationship to all the rest of human history. And it has usefulnesses, etc., but it should certainly not be the basis upon which we predicate human civilization. Human civilization is physical, fundamentally physical, and returning back to that is going to be hugely important. I think millennials are going to be fighting for that.
Yeah, we like nobody ever really predicts this, but like maybe because nobody's predicting it, it's exactly what'll happen. In like a generation and a half, there's just a fucking huge swing away from technology. Like it's so integrated, it'll be there, it'll be in the background, but it's novel for us. I mean, the internet's new. Like most people don't even have fiber yet, like DSL came out, like high speed, like we were on dial-up.
Whoa,
like, this
bro,
shit's super new.
I'm on dial-up right now. This is all dial-up.
I can tell.
56K. 56K.
But, maybe in a couple generations, everyone's fucking sick of it. The novelty's worn off. We don't care. And, like
we know it's not real.
We're all drug addicts at the end of the day, right? Like we're all looking for some dopamine hit. Some people jump out of airplanes. Some people are addicted to Twitter. Some people fucking like to go run, whatever. Some people smoke crack. Like it's all dopamine. It's all serotonin. And at some point, hopefully we recognize that, the social media algorithms, like those are over the top. Moms totally get their kids off of that stuff, and we find ourselves back in meat space, and technology takes a back seat, as it should, in order to help facilitate a better human experience, but isn't the human experience itself.
I'm very curious of the Twitter/X feed of somebody who likes to smoke crack. Like, what are the little things the algo picks up on? It's like, oh, well, you probably like Hunter Biden because you smoke crack. So this is probably like right up your alley, you little crackhead, you. And with that,
anyhow,
I mean, wait, one final point here. We act like scrolling and like being addicted to this thing is some new thing, but the fact is that it's absolutely not. Back in the day, people used to do this thing, for you Gen Zers out there, it was called channel surfing. And they would just sit there on their ass with the remote, and they would just press the channel button. And it was a lot like a Twitter feed. One channel would have something on it. You'd be like, oh, wow. You'd look at that for 2 seconds. Next. Before that, it was newspapers. Before that, it was magazines. Before that, it was comics. So humans are always looking for novel dopamine hits. I guess this is really what we should be trying to figure out, is where does the next novel dopamine hit come from? Is it from the internet or,
Get out there, touch grass, find some dopamine in the ground.
Touch grass for real.
Yeah,
dirt.
like legit touch grass.
Eat dirt.
Eat dirt.
Take
Curb
mushrooms.
stomp somebody.
Oh, this is going downhill fast.
Throw rocks.
Oh man, I love it. All right.
Punch a pedestrian. See what happens.
Punch a pedestrian.
If you want, go down to the riot. A lot of dopamine
real
to be
life
had.
interaction.
This is not financial advice or something you should actually do. If you do it at your own risk.
If you haven't rioted and you have a social media addiction, put the phone
Now is
down.
your chance.
Go outside, throw shit at people, and just see what happens. It'll be
Yeah.
new. It'll be interesting.
And know that you are being watched by the drones that are above you,
will
and
go
they
to
have
jail.
probably
At all
tracked you
times.
in
All
15D at all times. So,
But that'll be an
anyways,
experience. So
Have good experiences. Make good choices.
Stay arrogant. Sell sads.
thanks for tuning in to Better by Bitcoin. Bitcoin makes everything better. Like, subscribe, and follow us on X at BetterBYBTC, YouTube at BetterBYBitcoin. Not financial advice, mathematical certainty.